Ladies and gentlemen, I am Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran, and today we are going to be looking at just what is involved in stopping these Russian advances near Bakhmut. And we've got some footage of a mortar team in action, so stick around. All right, let's get into it. This is, of course, coming to us from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which is, of course, funded by the American government. So, you know, there's a certain perspective that you're going to get for sure. But this is still footage, combat footage on the ground. So good footage is good footage. So right there, you've got, talking about two unexploded ordnance. Right now, realistically, I get it. There's probably a very small number of bomb disposal experts, UXO, EOD teams in the Ukrainian military, and you just can't waste your time with stuff that's not really blocking the road. But still, two large, those looked like missiles, two large unexploded missiles in a field are a pretty big danger, and it's actually a persistent danger. In a lot of conflict zones, unexploded ordnance is a real danger. Even now, we still occasionally, when digging for new buildings, for example, in Europe, we'll find unexploded ordnance from the First or Second World War, and they actually have to close down the city block, evacuate everyone, and carefully defuse those old weapon systems because that explosive can still detonate, and some of the safety mechanisms that are stopping it from detonating could degrade over time. And it's unfortunate that oftentimes for years or decades after a war, unexploded ordnance will kill civilians. I will be curious is not the right word because I don't want it to happen. But I suspect that Ukrainian farmers who return to this region after the conflict are going to have a lot of unfortunate encounters. They probably, I imagine, will have to just pay someone with some sort of bomb or explosive clearing vehicle to just sweep their fields and verify that they're safe to be plowed. So, as we've talked about in the daily updates, Russia's primary objective in the east seems to be Bakhmut. This is a city that is sort of obviously one of the gateways to the bigger cities of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk in the Donetsk region. As you can see here, we got a mortar team. I think this is a really fascinating setup. So what they have here is a pickup truck. Just looks like the steering wheel set forward, looks like a Ford Ranger or a F-150, the same one you might find driving around any city in the U.S., but these guys have turned it into a mobile mortar platform. And this is not a new tactic. The Taliban are experts at this. They would get these Hiluxes, a Toyota pickup. They would have a mortar in the back. Sometimes they would actually put the mortar in the bed, but that's not a really good shooting platform for a mortar. But they would just drive around, drive to a site, set up their mortar, launch their rounds, pack the mortar up, and drive on as quick as possible before the counter battery fire could get dialed in. So it's interesting to see. It's sort of a hybrid, it looks like, of U.S.-style mortar operations and an insurgent mortar operation. So these guys are in a bunker. This is definitely where you want to be because, as discussed, right, if you shoot if you're putting rounds out, counter battery fire will automatically calculate and return fire, right? So you want to have somewhere safe you can get to quickly in a hurry to avoid becoming, a casualty. Yep, he's saying how he's in a shelter, right? Then they're talking, exactly. Now, this is interesting. They're firing and also being fired at. So I suspect that they are firing, changing locations, firing again, changing locations, firing again. It may be a cat and mouse game, and it sounds really intense, honestly. Yep, as you can see, this looks like a US-made 60mm mortar. And what I think is kind of fascinating is just the mismatch of gear. You can see they all seem to have front and back plates. They all have a helmet. But this guy's got a, well, black IBA. One, all t-shirts. Respect to the fact that they can fight in a t-shirts. Someone needs to tell the U.S. military that, because, man, they would lose their damn minds if they saw us in a t-shirt. In fact, a fun Afghanistan story, and by fun I mean just eye-rolling. You hear stories like this and you're going to be like, I'm shocked you didn't lose sooner. When we would go on patrols, right, like outside the wire, talking to villagers, avoiding getting IED'd, etc., we would sometimes be in the area of a major battalion level headquarters. And the battalion level headquarters had battalion level food. They actually had contractors, the same contractors that make food for like a college dorm, right? And that was kind of the quality of the food. So it was a real treat for us. Well, they got so mad that units would come from their combat patrols to the base. Not because we ate their food, they always had enough food, but because we would be sweaty and dirty. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're in a war zone, Paul. Of course you're going to be sweaty and dirty. And so they banned wearing combat shirts in the dining facility. Combat shirts are sort of a version of what these guys have, but imagine these, but it is the soft material on the chest where the bulletproof plate lies, and it's flame retardant camouflage along the sleeves and shoulders where it's exposed. So you have all over camouflage, but it breathes way better. And so they were so offended that combat soldiers existed that they banned us from the DFAC in combat shirts. And so instead, what we had to do, if we thought there was any remote possibility of our patrol getting lunch at somewhere nice, which honestly, when you have a bunch of soldiers, just nice, good, hot meals is a game changer. Soldiers will clamor to go on patrol, literally to risk their lives for the prospect of the burger station, right? Where you can get a double cheeseburger that they do right on the grill. It's a treat. And so that meant that we had to tell people, hey, bring an entirely separate uniform for you to change into in the event we have to go to the dining facility in a combat zone, in a FOB that was like repeatedly attacked. You're like, you see the Ukrainian forces here where they just understand that the way warfighting looks is not the most important part of warfighting. It is of secondary, tertiary importance to being effective in combat. And you can see, this is actually a really skilled mortar team, right? They're all working together. They know what's going on. These guys actually are trained properly, right? Making their adjustments, putting out rounds. They're really, I mean, this is really professional. So what they're doing, he talks about actually the mission, and once he says it, I'll break down what he's talking about. Okay, so what he's talking about is using mortars defensively. And what happens is prior to an attack, the enemy needs to concentrate their forces and to sort of become a spear and push into a weak spot in the lines. The problem is the goal with the mortar teams, they're probably getting intelligence from drones, and when they see these concentrations of troops prior to an attack, they want to force them to break apart, engage in a spoiling attack. And by getting these mortars involved, they can quickly, rapidly put rounds into this concentration of soldiers, force them to break apart, right? And then restart the whole process of preparing for an attack. So these are spoiling operations that this mortar team is engaged in. Yeah, you have to, I mean, you can imagine these guys just may look this good. They probably had some basic mortar training, and then the rest has just been experience. I mean, imagine running dozens of missions a day for months. You would have almost no choice but to become just an expert expert mortar team. And it's fascinating, too, that you can see that they're relying on regular civilian vehicles to get food, supplies, all in the backfield. Yep, as we talked about, this wheat field is not only burned, right, reducing crop yields, but is probably littered with UXO, unexploded ordnance. Okay, this is also fascinating. You can see we talk about this sometimes when I talk about the need to secure major routes. This is what I'm talking about, right? You can see this Toyota pickup has to pull over and allow the higher priority combat vehicles to pass through. This were not just one or two combat vehicles, you know, this is a 2-unit fighting vehicle patrol, but instead imagine this was dozens, a logistics convoy of 40 trucks, and that this was an entire tank battalion. You see how the Russians, especially with having their heavy automated forces, would have just a nightmarish time trying to pass along these narrow roads, right? You would have huge delays. It would be so much harder to pull over, again, with 40 trucks, right? They may not all be able to pull over. And so that's just a little illustration there of, what it takes to pass, to do maneuver mobility support, and why it's so important just to have big 2-lane highways where vehicles can go in, where full combat vehicles like those armored vehicles, armored fighting vehicles, whatever they were, can pass side by side. Totally changes your maneuver and mobility in the battlefield. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this. Of course, as you guys know, the intense, most combat heavy videos I can't post on YouTube anymore. They are censoring them. They are on the Patreon, so the link is in the description, right? You can check out all my breakdowns. I do a breakdown of several videos every 2 weeks. Thanks to my lieutenant tier patrons, you guys make this possible. I'll catch you in the next one.